Hi, welcome to my podcast for 2010 HSV Community Practice Approaches. I'm Annette, and today I'll be talking about language and dialogue, and the practice of using particular and specific dialogic concepts as a tool in collaborative community participatory development. I'll discuss how delivering this higher level of dialogue, which includes using specific keyword listening skills, enriches the ability to have intentional directive conversations, and how it can also enable community participation by building bonds together that can develop creative, thriving and sustainable community service projects. Also, I'll briefly look at how this can be enhanced through using the community practice qualities of skills of meta-competencies, and I'll have a quick dip into the readings of Kelly 2009 and Leathers from 2010, and then discuss how professional, positive and intentional dialogue helps create enriched community development outcomes, such as understanding when the one-on-one or the 1-2-3 method is the most appropriate. Intertwined throughout this discussion, I reflect on learning opportunities and reflect on given opportunities to practice dialogue that synthesized my understanding, including through role plays in class over previous weeks. I'll start by unpacking my understanding and reflection on the readings by Kelly. To me, the addition of building a strength-based approach to community development and the use of listening for a higher specific language to react to is something I have already developed an understanding for. I found it interesting to understand the power of the definition of heuristic language and how its use can create an identifiable space to explore other leading questions that can project dialogue to a specific area. This can sufficiently bolster the richness and outcomes of community development communication. Previous to entering university, I completed dual diplomas in counselling and community service. I have studied and practiced the theories and principles of identifying structure and essence of language, the disciplines of listening and reactive dialogue, communication and questioning theories and strategies, and group development and facilitation. With these relevant frameworks and skills already gathered, I became excited when reading Kelly's paper, as the three founding concepts, the principles, and all the variances were similar to what I already understood about cooperative dialogue. But when designed to be used in community participatory development, they stood alone. This just made so much sense to me, to be able to take this level of dialogue to a higher level of creative, active communication with intent. I resonate with the words of Kelly and Leathers and to their idea that in principle the process of participatory dialogue was complementary to a counselling style of reactive listening. In opening a discussion on dialogue, one could think we were talking basically about talking. However, in this space, we are learning that listening and identifying keywords as a collaborative theoretical method. Incorporating this for the purpose of community development enables a measured way for opportunities to be created by allowing the participants to find where a need or direction can be delivered. When reading Leathers' second chapter, which was titled Developmental Community Work and Method, the examples that given were from the Nambour Community Centre, which again resonated strongly within me. I immediately went to my photos I took on a pre-study trip from Brisbane to Longreach by train in 2015. There was this photo I had captured at Nambour railway station, and one of the lovely paintings on the wall from the associated schools in the area, which had been organised by the Nambour Community Centre. The nature of learning becomes more realistic when you can identify and link the material with a personally solidifying experience. Reflecting on our in-class learning when using the focus lens point as what is now understood as participatory dialogue, these examples made more sense as to how this method of communication can work. When I look back at having my turn at being a community worker with our Max in the role play of week 3, I remember using and listening for keywords that led Max to uncover where he could be involved in developing a fix for the issues. It also brought the issue into the context of an acceptance, that there was an agreement that we understood the why, and it was agreed that there needed to be further discussion together about the how. I was encouraged to hear how our co-facilitator Alex told us in week 4 that this meeting with the real Max did indeed lead to the Sturdy Park Youth Project. Thinking again in reflection and remembering some of the words used as keywords in my dialogue with our role play with Max, they were related to his previous history of helping with his musical art, his home in the street, and how affected he was by the situation. And I understand now that these words are transferable as heuristic words of passion, home, and fear. When Kelly, in his 2009 paper about building people-centered approaches, talks about having 4 principal practices of dialogue, he is again describing how we can use specific communication that facilitates our part of purposeful steps towards meaningful and collaborative approaches or outcomes. The purposeful use of an empathetic view in conversation provides a pathway for us as workers to walk in step and alongside the participant. It can give insight into the happenings and mechanics of the world from that level. In responding to communication and building of relationships, we incorporate how specific use of dialogue can be used as the cornerstones to work productively, collaboratively, and most effectively. It is when we engage thoughtfully in practice, in duality with the qualities that are pronounced within the meta-competencies for community practice, that the skills of purposeful dialogical practice produce working resources for successful possibilities and positive activity. These are eloquently described in the last 2 principles of practice as involving action and connection. In this way, using dialogue as a participatory method gives us the comprehensive understanding to decide if the next approach should focus on remaining in the one-to-one world, or if stepping out into the 1-to-3 based perspective would be more appropriate. In other words, does the outcome require the process to remain as the worker-to-client relationship, or does the relationship need to branch out to be exclusive and shared with other stakeholders, resources, and clients? The provision of successful community development is reliant on how we use our experienced dialogical and communicative skills to, and always with the participation's acceptance, guide where the outcome naturally leads, and not always where we think it should end. And finally, although we always need to hold up our own professional accredited persona that has to set the boundaries and play by the rules, we need to know not how to push our own agenda into the discussion zone. To do this successfully, I feel we need to listen for the stories our client tells us and discover how we can enable them to become part of the positive and beneficial narrative, rather than making decisions behind closed doors where only dialogue is bureaucratic. In retrospect, I have focused on how, and most importantly the why, of the use of professional, productive, participatory dialogue completes the framework for successful interpersonal and creative outcomes for community development. I discussed how developing a working appreciation of looking for those higher language keywords can be gateways into using the practices, principles of dialogue, and how they can gain further creditable pathways for outcomes and opportunities. And I touch on how linking the qualities and skills of practice from the meta competencies can enhance our dialogical practice production. And finally, I concluded with a discussion on how productive dialogue can lead to empathetic communication, which ultimately promotes a process to enduring, strengthening, and creative outcomes that are inclusive. I believe a workable knowledge and understanding of the fundamentals of dialogue, language, listening, and response to be an important skill to attribute to. Thanks for listening.